What is happening, everyone? Welcome back to episode 23 of Manny's Food Channel. It's your boy Mansoor, aka Manny, and for today's episode, I'm going to be making a dish that is very similar amongst different cultures and backgrounds, whether it be Turkish, Persian, Greek, or Lebanese. There's many different variations of this dish made with different kinds of meats, herbs, vegetables, or spices. Today, I'll be making a dolmeh, or a stuffed grape leaf. Now with this recipe, as always, it's extremely delicious. It's very easy to make in big batches for your friends and family. And also you can make a vegetarian version of this as well, just by omitting the meat. This is one of the recipes that you won't want to miss. So without further ado, let's get to it. So to start this dolma recipe, we're going to cook off the rice and the split peas first. I'm going to add in the beef stock and cook the rice and the split peas in the beef stock to add a bit of flavor in there. I'm going to toss in the basmati rice. Depending on what kind of rice you have at home, I prefer to use long grain rice, but you can certainly use short grain as well, like our barrio adds a bit of creaminess to the filling. I'm going to add the split peas, which I soaked in water overnight. I didn't brine them, but I just soaked them overnight to soften them up just a touch. I'm going to add a little bit of salt and a couple bay leaves. Now this will be the time to add any kind of aromatics you want into the rice and the split peas. That way add some more flavor. You can add some thyme, you can add some rosemary, some garlic, whatever you prefer. But because I'm adding beef stock and the bay leaf, that's going to be enough aromatics and flavor for me. So now I'm just going to bring this up to a simmer and let it simmer for around 15 minutes. So now that the rice and split peas are coming up to a quick simmer, I'm going to put a lid on it, cook it for 15 minutes. I'm going to cook the rice until it's just al dente, so probably around 70 to 80% of it being cooked. Because we're going to cook the rice and the split peas the rest of the way when we cook them in the oven. So now I'm just going to add a lid on this and then we'll move on to continuing the rest of the filling. So for the filling, we'll first start off by small to medium dicing one onion. Next up, we're going to grate some garlic cloves. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to chiffonade some mint. I put another chopping board on top because I don't want to taint the color of the wooden chopping board I have underneath. Whenever you're chiffonading anything, whether it's lettuce, basil, or mint, make sure that you put the biggest leaves at the bottom and the smaller ones towards the top. And what you're going to do is you're going to roll it really tightly like a cigar into a cigar shape, and then very thinly slice or chiffonade any kind of veg that you're trying to do. You want it to be very thin stripes, and make sure you don't go over it a couple of times. You only chop it up once, so that way the flavor and the smell stays within the herb. The more you cut it, the more the flavor leaks out onto the board, and you want that flavor to be inside the food that you're cooking. Once you slice your herb, the board should be the same color. You shouldn't see any green leaking onto the board, and you should have very thinly sliced and chiffonade herb. In this case, it's the mint. So I'm going to continue to chiffonade some more mint. Next, I'm going to chiffonade some parsley. We're going to do the same thing as we did with the mint. Just roll it into a nice cigar shape. Only chop it once. Don't chop through it multiple times, otherwise you lose some of the flavor of the parsley. And then just thinly chop it. It's fine if you don't have even slices or chiffonade pieces of parsley. A little bit of texture and flavor in there is definitely okay. So we'll just go through it once, chiffonade all of the parsley. Next up, I'm going to thinly slice some scallions. I'm just going to remove the roots here. Don't slice too much of it. You don't want to waste any of these scallions. You want to keep on as much as you can. And just remove the top if it is a little bit dry. Discard the top there. and then just very thinly slice the scallions. Now that we're finished with our prep, just before we're about to start making the beef filling, we'll have a check and see how the rice is doing. So the rice has been simmering for around 15 minutes. The stock is just about absorbed. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off the heat, remove this from heat, and set this aside, continue on to make the filling, and then eventually we're going to fold this into the rest of the beef filling. So now I'm just going to set this aside, and we'll continue on with the dolmeh filling. Now for the exciting part, we're going to start off by adding some olive oil to your pan. Make sure you spread out the oil on all the surfaces of your pan. Then we're going to sweat off the onions first. I'm going to sweat it off for probably 5 minutes or so until it starts to become translucent before I add in the garlic. Now I'm going to toss in the garlic. Remember, whenever you're cooking garlic, you don't want to cook it on too high of a heat because you don't want it to burn. So we'll just continue to leave it on medium heat and cook the garlic for a couple minutes before we add in the ground beef. Alright, now it's starting to turn golden brown. I'm going to add in my ground beef. If you like ground lamb, you can certainly use ground lamb instead. It's really delicious, and the fat in there definitely adds some flavor. But I'm using lean ground beef. And make sure that when you add it to your pot, that you break up the ground beef into small chunks. And you continue to do this throughout the cooking process because you really want like small shards of beef evenly distributed throughout the filling. So just use your wooden spoon, break it up as much as you could, and cook the ground beef until it turns golden brown, and then we'll start to add in the rest of the herbs and spices as well. So as the meat is browning, I'm going to season the beef just a touch, and then when we add in the rest of the veg and the herbs, I'm going to re-season it again. So now I'm just going to add in a touch of salt as well as a little bit of pepper. And then just fold this in and continue to brown the meat for a couple more minutes. Then we'll start adding the herbs and the veg. So now I'm going to start adding in the spices and the herbs. I'm going to start by adding in some dill, the chopped parsley, the chiffonade mint, as well as the scallions, the thinly sliced scallions. And I'm going to fold this in really nicely. Turn the heat down to around medium to low heat. Continue to let this sizzle and cook off for a couple minutes. But before I do that, I'm going to add some cinnamon, evenly distribute it, give it a nice mix, and then continue to saute this meat filling for a couple more minutes, and season to taste. So now I've turned off the heat. I've seasoned this beef mix. I'm going to add in some raisins. These are golden raisins. If you don't like raisins, you can omit this step. But at this point, you can add in prunes or whatever kind of dry fruit you like, just to give it a bit of sweetness in the dolma fillings. And I'm going to add some pine nuts. Pine nuts for a little bit of richness and taste. That creaminess you get once you cook off the pine nuts tastes really good. So now I'm going to put this on a plate and cool it down in the fridge for 5 to 10 minutes. And then we'll add it to the rice mix, and we can start to build the dolmades. Now this is where it all starts to come together. So here I have about half of the portion of rice that I cooked up, and I'm only going to put half of the meat because I want to make sure that it's all mixed in there very evenly before I add in the rest. So I'm just going to add in around half the meat, half the portion of rice, give it a very nice mix. At this point, if you need to season it a little more, season it now, because once we put it in the grapevines or the grape leaves, then we can't season it again. So season it now if you need to, but give this a really good mix before you add in the rest. And then we'll start to add the filling into the grape leaves. Next up, what I'm going to do is I'm going to prepare my baking dish before I start rolling the dolmades. So I'm just going to add a touch of olive oil at the bottom of this baking dish here. And the reason I'm doing that is make sure that the dolma doesn't burn. And next what I'm going to do is I'm going to layer some grape leaves at the bottom. As the dolmades are cooking, we don't want the dolmades to burn. So just remove the vines and layer a couple layers of grape leaves. Usually when you buy a bottle, you have a lot of excess, so you're not going to usually roll out or make all of the grape leaves that you have in the bottle. So cover every layer, edge to edge, the whole surface of your baking dish, and then we can start rolling our dolmas. Now to roll the dolmas, you're going to grab one grape leaf and dry it out as much as possible. Remove any of the moisture. And then you want to remove the stem because it's very hard and it's inedible. Now the vine side or the stem side is going to be on the inside and the flat side is going to be our presentation side. So you want the vine side to be on the inside. Flatten it out as much as possible, and you're going to put around a tablespoon of filling. You don't want to put too much because you don't want the dolmas to burst. If your leaves are a little bit bigger, then you can certainly add a little more, but generally around 1 tablespoon. Next, you're going to roll the dolmas, and you're going to pull back as you're rolling, just to keep it as tight as possible as you're rolling so they don't burst throughout the cooking process and as you're rolling it as well. Roll it one more time, fold in each side as tight as possible, and continue to roll until you have a very nicely rolled and sealed dolma. Just like this. And then on our baking sheet or our baking dish, you want to put it as tightly as possible arranged throughout your baking dish so that way it doesn't burst or open up as you're cooking, and continue to do this process until all your dolmas are built, and then we can put in our stock and start putting it in the oven to cook. You can buy these grape leaves in any kind of Middle Eastern supermarket. These ones here are pickled or they've been brined. So if you bought the one that's been brined, all you have to do is remove the grape leaves from the brine and give it a quick rinse under cold water just to remove some of that saltiness and some of that brine in there. If you bought fresh ones, then run it under warm water, or you might blanch it as well just to soften up the vine leaves just a little bit. But you can certainly buy pickle ones. I find the pickle ones or the brined one is a lot easier to work with. So we're going to continue to build the dolmas and place it nice and tightly beside each other. So finally, what we're going to do before we pop this in the oven is I'm going to add some beef stock, and I'm just going to add enough beef stock to cover all these dolmas. If you don't have beef stock, you can use veg stock or even some chicken stock. Next, I'm gonna add just this baking tray here. The reason why I'm doing this is because I want to put a bit of pressure on top of the dolma so as they cook, it doesn't burst open. Now, because I've rolled it and I've placed it in the baking sheet very tightly, I'm not gonna cover up these sides here. Mostly I'm concerned about the middle so that way it doesn't pop up or it doesn't burst. And now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna cover it up in tin foil, and then we're gonna pop it in the oven at 400 degrees Fahrenheit for around 20 minutes. Then take it out, and then we're gonna add some more flavoring to it. So as the dolma is cooking, I'm gonna quickly make a yogurt cucumber dill sauce or a dipping sauce. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna grate around half a cucumber, and I'm gonna squeeze out around half of the juice, but it depends on how thin or thick your yogurt is or how thin or thick you like your sauce. If the yogurt's a little bit thick, then maybe you wanna keep in the cucumber juice. If not, then maybe squeeze out some of it and strain it. Next up, I'm gonna add homemade yogurt. I made this myself. If you want the recipe, let me know and then I'll make a video on how to make homemade yogurt. I made this with Homa milk, so it's got a lot of fat and creaminess, and that's kind of the yogurt that you want to go with. But if you're looking for a healthy alternative, then you can definitely use skimmed yogurt or fat-free yogurt. So I'm going to give this a quick mix, and then next up I'm going to add in some dried dill and a touch of salt, around a teaspoon of salt, but it just depends on your seasoning to taste. I'm going to give this a quick mix, and then finally, if you like a little bit of zest or tang inside your dill yogurt dipping sauce, what I like to do is I like to add a clove or two of garlic. And this is raw garlic. I didn't do anything to it, didn't roast it or whatnot. If you don't like raw garlic in your yogurt, then you can omit this step. And then we're going to give this another mix. It'd be better if you can make it the day before, so that way all the flavor infuses nicely into this yogurt dipping sauce. But if you don't have the time, an hour before or even half an hour before, you'll definitely get some good flavor in there. So now we're going to set this aside and have a look and see how the dolma is doing. Alright, so I've left this in the oven for around 20 minutes. I'm just going to have a quick look to see how it's doing. Just be careful, it's extremely hot. Move the lid. Looks like it's doing really well. It's cooking really nicely. You can see that the dolmas haven't bursted. So this stock needs to be absorbed, but before I toss it back into the oven, I'm gonna add in a mixture of even parts lime juice, red wine vinegar, and then around half of that portion of sugar, just to give it a bit of zest, sour, tanginess, and a bit of sweetness as well. And I'm gonna put this baking tray back on top, cover it up, and let it cook the rest of the way in the oven. This is one of those flavor profiles that I never forget because my parents used to make this a lot for me as a kid. And unfortunately here in Calgary we received a very heavy snowfall and I thought this would be a great time to introduce this dish because it's a great dish that warms your soul on a very cold wintry day. So without further ado, time for the taste test. Cheers. It is, as always, extremely delicious. The sweetness from the pine nuts and the raisins is balanced out by the tanginess of the red wine vinegar and the lime juice as well. And the dish really comes together with that little bit of added dill, cucumber, yogurt sauce that we have at the very bottom there. So definitely try this recipe out. Let me know how it is. And if you enjoyed this video, please give my video a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. And I look forward to seeing everybody next time.